So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we're making a return to the map LOND, which was one of the maps that was introduced in the various map packs that were released quite some time ago at this point. Obviously it's a representation of a coastal port somewhere in the west, and as far as the settlement goes, it is very basic as far as layout goes. I mean, it's obviously quite angular as well, but the outer choke point is going to be important because as soon as you get inside the settlement, there's actually quite a lot of open terrain, and you may actually have to retreat up onto the makeshift natural walls that the settlement is pretty much ringed by. And also, the final stand is technically this keep over here, but it's a lot closer to the front line over here against some of the attackers than it would be over on the other side there. So it is a conundrum of a map for the defenders to have to try and deal with. There's a lot of open space within the settlement, and the choke points on the outer walls are actually fairly large and not the easiest things to hold on to. But there are a few locations in which the defenders can really make the attackers pay for every inch of ground they try to take. But we'll go through the armies pretty quickly here because there's not too much else to say about the map itself. The player who sent me this battle replay over here was DF John. He's going to be playing as one of the attackers, the Angmar. We all know how effective Angmar are on the attack. We've got some Snaga Stalkers who are just hidden here. They're obviously going to be just thrown in as fodder. Witch-Round Pikemen, decent armour for pikes, so it does mitigate their weakness to archers somewhat, albeit they will be better off being used a little bit later on when the attack is fully underway, and adding that anchor to the line can prove to be a real headache for the defenders, and how they choose to deal with that is going to be up to them. Guardians of Khazad-Dum, a fantastic heavy infantry unit for being on the attack as well. They lack a little bit in terms of offensive values in comparison to other units of a similar cost from other factions, but you know, the added defensive value, the big shields, the big thick armour is very useful and is definitely indicative of what Angmar are all about. So we've got some Blackwatch Legion here as well, so pushing through when the time comes. I think we've seen timing, well, in the very last siege battle we saw in Reforged, but on the Elven front, the timing actually of the Great Shield pushes was probably slightly off, and as a result, they ended up largely failing. They did make some progress, but they didn't cripple the defences in the way that they really kind of need to once they're committed. So we'll see if DF John is able to do that as well. Angmar Marauders are very basic as far as Orc infantry goes, so they're better than the Snaga Stalkers, of course, in melee, but not by much. And you do pay a little bit more for them as well. We've got some Barrow Wights, which are the easiest unit in the game really to use. You just slowly trudge them into melee and then watch and wait as they do their thing. Very difficult to kill off, of course. Trolls of Angmar, so they're going to be timing is going to be important for them, otherwise they'll end up getting burnt down by the defenders pretty quickly. The Witches, we saw the Witches in the last replay as well, that involved Angmar. They did do some damage, but by that point, Angmar had already lost the battle overall, so again, the Witches do need to be used. If things are going badly for the attackers, they will need to be brought forward and used in a more dicey situation than maybe they'd like, but of course very vulnerable. Then both bodyguard units there. Now we have Lindon, played by Y2K86. Lindon, very different to Angmar in terms of what very damaging units, obviously a bit more, certainly more of a faction more about finesse than the brutality. Lindon Marines, so we got some javelins on the front, good for use and support. The four Lindon ones, of course, are spears against the infantry within the settlement, but still, both units of javelins will be useful. The Harland infantry are a very good unit of standard elven infantry once they get into melee, but their lack of armour does actually mean that when it comes to taking punishment from range, which is something line infantry are kind of expected to be able to do as well, the Harland infantry are a little bit less effective than many of their peers, but when it comes to dealing damage, they're pretty damn good. The Noldorin Guard are a very good unit of heavier line infantry. Obviously you do pay a lot more for them, but they're also a very scary unit indeed. And the heavy swordsman version, the Blade Masters, are of course one of the finest units of the two-handed shock infantry that the game has to offer. Got a couple of units of Mithlon Pikemen and some Harland Guard backing them up, so some pikes and archers there, and that's pretty much it. I mean, you know, Lindon are an expensive faction, they are elven after all, so there's always going to be something missing. Then we have Umbar, who look like they've got a fairly complete army. They've gone for some upgraded Corsair infantry, some Corsair Blackguards, some Balagai footmen, so some rather basic units all around there. Then full rundown really of Alcarondas Legion, which is expensive but can be very effective in this situation if Umbar are used as well, if Umbar are one of the quality focused factions on the attack and they decide to really lean into that. Balakith shield bearers have got armour piercing, they've also upgraded their own armour, as have the Axe Guard, and then the Harbingers of Castamere, of course, heavy swordsmen as well, not quite on the same level as the Lindon ones, but still very, very strong nonetheless. Then we have Harad, played by Diego Rio Ramos. He's got some Haradrim archers on the front just for some token skirmishing, which we haven't seen much of, to be fair. There's a little bit from Umbar, but those Corsair infantry don't have the most ammunition, so maybe they're forced into being far more aggressive here, the attackers. Haradrim spearmen and Southron pikemen forming the front line. Obviously the spearmen very much disposable. The Southron pikemen very low stats, but armor piercing can make them surprisingly effective. Dismounted Serpent Guard, then we've got a lot of Muhards, including the Javelin Throwers, the Beast Hunters, the Demons of the Desert, very devastating, of course, the Trollman Javelins. Muhard Berserkers, armor piercing Muhard warriors are not, but very numerous. Then we've got the Trollman and the Champions of Nafra here at the back, always must-brings for Harad. They're effective in 99% of battles they're in, really. Champions of Nafra, obviously the bodyguard tier unit, and then the Serpent's Fangs, which is actually where the general is, so staying out of harm's way for as long as possible. And then last, but by no means least, we have Rohan on the attack. Rohan are a rarer faction to see because obviously the cavalry, single HP cavalry that they would be very, very good with, not the best kind of unit in the game at the moment, but this is a siege anyway, so Mark has brought some Westmark Marshals, he's got some Riddermark Spearmen and Riddermark Axemen. We have got more Westmark Infantry, Westmark Marshals again, Riddermark Cavalry, so he has got some of the single HP Cavalry and the Eastmark Horse Archers. Riddermark Archers, Helmengas. I'll be interested to see how this army actually shapes up in this siege battle. We've seen Rohan, very often when we see Rohan it seems that it's whenever the next themed representation of Helm's Deep comes around. Other than that, they tend to be the forgotten faction in the game, really. Medicel Guard are there. Shield Maidens of Rohan can be very effective in battles though, as can the Helm's Hammers, armour piercing once more. So let's move on to the defenders then. Starting off with the Numenor here, played by Team Darkstar, who's got some Balagai archers. So they share the Balagai units with Umbar, of course, but the Numenorian Shield Guard and cohorts are a bit different to the offerings that Umbar have, especially the Shield Guard. Armour-piercing spears at the high end are a rare enough thing. Gondor really the only other faction to have access to such things regularly. Numenorian Steel Bows, not much ammunition, but very damaging. They're just going to have to pick the right targets. Balagai Pikes. Over here we've got Naru Royal Guard, some Shield Guard, both bodyguard units of course for the defenders, Royal Legion of Armenelos and the Pharazim Swordmasters. Some more Pikes, Naru and Balagai and Seafarers obviously with those Javelin supports. There is a unit outside the wall apparently, it is the Pharazim Nobles, but riding off on their own into such situations is going to be fairly hairy for them. Then we have her Tumihai playing as Dol Amroth. He's got some dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan, some Doranernal archers up on the walls, Tarnostian spears, pretty standard fare. I mean, you can see the heavy swordsmen are in there. A lot of the other units are fairly basic, but pikes are still going to be very, very handy. Got some, that's Khazad-Dum, but also a catapult over here, so I'm sure we'll see Dol Amroth scatter and disperse later on. He's got the Arathirum as well, which can be very, very deadly. And finally, we have Daddy Mac, who's playing as Khazad-Dum. We've got some warriors of Khazad-Dum, some 3rd Legion infantry, Orc Hunters, Hammers of Gundabad, 3rd Legion, pretty standard for what you'd expect for Khazad-Dum here. They've got plenty of money to spend and they're going to spend it on their best infantry units. Legion Bodyguard, plenty of the standard Legion units as well. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers with the Iron Watch. Obviously the Iron Watch and Miramir are more than capable of matching the Witchers in terms of devastation. They take a little bit more effort to use than the Witchers, I'd say, once they're in range, but given they are the defenders, the advantage should be theirs in that regard. 1st Legion, Sons of the Fallen and Mithril Guard are also here. So, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the attackers are getting things underway. So a little bit of a preamble there, but now the Corsair Infantry are going to actually open up proceedings, but very shortly after that the Arathirum here are going to not get their lances down. That's a little bit of a shame on their part, but such is the way of things when you're dealing with some of the more temperamental aspects of Medieval 2. But yes, the Corsair Infantry going to... yeah, now the lances come down. I mean, to be fair, I think they're actually targeting the Balagai spears, but considering the spears weren't really ready for that charge, it is actually going to be somewhat effective. This is the kind of thing which they're going to need to do a lot more of. One of the riders does fall, which is unfortunate for them, but still. Interestingly enough to see how the attackers have lined up. They've decided to go with Angmar and Umbar coming in from the front, which is obviously a very heavy and robust attacking force. Lindon are on their own over here, which actually would not have been my choice for sending on their own, because they can struggle when they're bottled up like this, especially against a veritable steel wall that the dwarves of Khazad-Dum can often be. They can make life a little bit more awkward for the dwarves with all of their javelins, but it's going to be very much a game of cat and mouse, which maybe that's what Y2K wanted, and maybe he requested to be on his own over on this side of things, and he's willing to play the long game over there. We actually do have a melee engagement over here, though. With Rohan and Harad as well, they lack a little bit in terms of defensive values, and as far as an infantry faction goes, you would give the edge here to Numenor, in spite of the armour piercing both Rohan and especially Harad have at their disposal. The quality that Numenor have should be far too much, especially against more of the basic stuff like this. I mean, Riddermark spears and some of the Muhards that Harad have are going to be absolutely no match for the heavy Numenorian infantry. You can see some of the Axemen are arriving. They will do a bit more damage, of course, but with even lower defensive values, the Numenorians will cut through them quickly also. So it's going to be all about numbers here, really. Rohan opening things up, Helmingast firing away. Return fire from the Balaguire archers as well. I think actually the Helmingast are slightly superior as far as archers go to the Balaguire. Obviously Numenor got other archer options as well. Riddermark archers though, very, very basic. Catapult shots coming in. So you can also see that they decided to abandon this section of the city as well, which I completely understand. The settlement is rather large, even for 3 armies to try and cover. And even here there's a lot of open terrain that they may have to worry about when their initial defensive lines start to come under a little bit more duress. Angmar and Harad and Umbar meanwhile seemingly going to be taking the long route. I mean, it's a fairly long battle, but there was also 10,000 frames of deployment and then shifting around, so there's always that to consider as well. 4th Legion Shield Guard coming forwards to prevent the 4 Lindon Marines from simply moving close enough to use their javelins and hit the targets they want to. 4th Legion Shield Guard may be spears, but they're still going to be far superior to the 4 Lindon Marines in melee. Backing up a little bit, and now they will be attempting to utilise their javelins on the very same unit that just attacked them in melee. This is how Lindon can soften the dwarves up before a main assault, but like I said, it's going to be a fairly long process for Lindon to do this over here. It is an interesting conundrum for the dwarves though, because how far out do they decide to try and chase these javelin men? Trying to go after that unit of 4th Legion just in behind, because the temptation could be to push out, but if you do, that's when the Lindon infantry can of course surround and eliminate your units one by one. Over yonder, we have got still the Balaguire archers. Interestingly enough, that unit of Numenorian cohort getting completely overrun, so Team Darkstar does need to be a little bit careful of this. His units individually are going to be far stronger, but the mob tactics that Rohan and Harad are using over here already having the desired effect on the first unit of infantry, and just sending units in one by one to hold the line is not really going to be the answer here. Numenor need to be gaining the edge consistently in melee. Numenor, they do have ranged options, but they are certainly a faction which is defined by their ability to do the business up close and personal. What's going on here? Looks like maybe a bit of friendly fire there on the Tarnostian Spearmen. The Umbar Balaguire units are now also going to be engaging for the first time. The Tarnostian Spearmen kind of reforming. The fact they were in loose formation not helping their case initially. Very similar kind of units though, both of these. The kicker though is going to be the other units that are around them. The spears just a defensive unit to make up the numbers, but stuff like the Perithil Champions for Dol Amroth, very damaging indeed, defined by their two-handed swords as a faction. The Barrow-Wights on the other hand for the attackers, very much going to be a problem. Snaga arriving as well just to provide those extra numbers on the front line, which is always going to be useful of course, bringing over some pikes now also. So it's going to be fairly long road this for the attackers, I think. If this is how they're deciding to set the stall out, they're not being hyper aggressive, which based on how long the battle is, I think that much was always going to be true. It's interesting. 4 Lindon Marines, they out of ammunition, willingly deciding to take this engagement now against the 4th Legion Shield Guard, which is not a fight I think they're going to win, so that's rather interesting. Back here. Arrow fire. And the Orcons of Khazad-Dum are decently damaging, but angle, I mean, it's just about okay. Some of the arrows are hitting the dirt on the cliff. I don't know why they're so far back, to be honest. They could stand to go a little bit closer and get more of a direct angle into Lindon. I mean, these dwarven missiles are exactly the sort of thing which Lindon will not enjoy facing up to. More javelins coming in, this time hitting the unit of warriors of Khazad-Dum, which is now charging into melee to also contest this choke point with the 4 Lindon Marines. Over this way, meanwhile, looks like more of a comprehensive engagement still occurring. On the outside of the semicircle are the defenders, as they would want to be, but for the attackers, they won't mind too much. The fact that the Barrow-wights are on the front line, it means you can kind of commit them and then be sure of the fact that this attack is going to keep going for as long as you're willing to send units to help the Barrow-wights. More Balagai footmen, I mean, they're not really going to be the answer here. The Doranano pikes are here. They're going to try and maybe just walk through the lines. I don't think they've got enough mass to be able to do that as of yet. Maybe I'm wrong. There is a gap here, actually, but the problem with this is that there are Dol Amroth reinforcements right there, and dismounted knights the Silver Swan. You can end up routing basic units like Balagai footmen, although I guess it's worth a go on Darthy Darth's part, just to see if he can cripple this front line somewhat. Tarnostian spearmen moving in to reinforce, Angmar marauders, so more of the rabble being sent in to keep this assault going. The Balagai footmen did not rout in the end though, so they have managed to kind of make those gains stick, I suppose, with some of the Barrow-wights also finding their way further forwards. That initial front line from Numenor has been dealt with pretty professionally, you'd have to say, by Rohan and Harad. And what is going to occur next? I mean, Balagai archers in melee, some really smart spearmen. They're obviously not going to be up to much in melee, nor a Haradrim spearman, but like I said, numbers so far have been the key for the attackers over in this position. We've got the Balagai archers still shooting in almost point blank. Numenorian steel bows still not firing as of right now. I mean, it's understandable given that most of the high numbers units that the attacks are sent forward are not exactly conducive for the steel bows to be used efficiently. You can see here Haradrim spearmen are managing to get in and around the positions. More Rohan axemen being sent forward. The shield maidens with their throwing axes. Some Muhards arriving on the front line to ensure that the manpower reserves stay high. It's the problem for Numenor. They need to reorganise themselves in a more comprehensive manner than they've managed so far. The other two attacking avenues seem to be a little bit slower, but I mean, if Harad and Rohan can really seize the initiative here, they may as well keep pushing on. Keep up the good work. Meanwhile, Dol Amroth had a little bit of a scare with that gap on the front line, but it's actually now potentially the sort of thing they can utilise to their advantage. If they can maybe cycle away a little bit further and then get their lances down, they can actually start utilising their cavalry to mow down the Barrow-wights, and that is one of the few situations in which you'll actually see the Barrow-wights die off pretty fast. They're really getting a big run up now though. Corsair infantry being sent forward to keep the fires of this assault lit. Doranano pikemen, I mean, there's some Angmar marauders that are broken and fighting to the death. I mean, I can only assume they're intentionally leaving this gap for the cavalry, but Tumahai needs to utilise his cavalry a little bit faster if he's going to do so, because there's more spears arriving. And that is still a gap on the front line. Like, it's the sort of thing which can be potentially a real problem if you allow it to fester. Meanwhile, a very neat front line this from the dwarves. This is exactly the kind of warfare in which dwarven infantry loves to find itself in. It's the sort of grind that overall, while Lindon have got a lot of melee defense, which will help them in this kind of situation, any missiles that influence the fight, I'm going to send this in the dwarves' direction. But I mean, this is rather interesting because you've got the two opposing philosophies here of melee defense and then armour. Not that the dwarves' melee defense is poor, but obviously they've got a far bigger focus on heavy metal. But yeah, It's actually a fight in which Lindon maybe won't do too badly if they can depend on their melee defense, especially if they can get their pikes involved as well. But they need to be careful, because if they try and push through the dwarves, that's a recipe for disaster. The dwarves will happily allow them to do so as the rain continues to pour. Nothing makes a coastal city feel more grim than when it's raining heavily. Well, at least the kind of coastal cities I often get sent to. Harad Spearman, another unit that's pushing through, but again, like the Numenorian steel bows, one of those Farazim nobles got flung from his horse there by one of the spearmen. But yeah, the steel bows in melee easily going to be able to defeat these Harad spearmen. But even still, this is javelins coming in. This is proving to be a rather... It's proved to be a struggle so far for Numenor. More and more units being sent forward, more Moonhards. I mean, the one problem that the attackers may run into is they're really pushing with a lot of these lower end units. If things do start to turn for them, which fire arrows may be the sort of thing to induce a rout, it will turn very quickly, so you need to make sure that they've got plenty of reinforcements close by, which I'm not certain they do. I mean, the units are a little bit stretched at this point, so maybe these fire arrows are the way in which Numenor can recover. Helmengas and shield maidens in melee as well. I mean, they are designed to be somewhat useful in melee, but certainly not powerhouse units that can bludgeon Numenorians to death with ease. Farazim nobles still being used to try and cover for these gaps that are appearing. They do actually rout that unit of Moonhard warriors that was pushing, so this is the potential pitfall that they are running into now. What have we over here? Throwing axes being used to devastating effects, and of course throwing axes best against lightly armoured units, so they're going to absolutely savage a Lindon front line. And the Khazad-Dum reclaimers, of course, can use their ammunition freely because they're also very useful as a melee unit, which they will need to be employed as later on. The Marines thinking about moving in. Lindon Guard ready. I mean, there are more, obviously the more serious units of Noldorin have still yet to be committed, but there's only so much of this kind of warfare that Lindon are going to be able to withstand, but they are willing to continue to commit elves to this cause. But they're also alone facing off against the dwarves, so Lindon do have by far the hardest task. The other attacks have got two armies to work with. They've got far more margin for error and also more time on their hands as a result. They've simply got more units they can commit, so the attacks can carry on for longer. Dol Amroth with a completely comprehensive front line once again, Doranale, Pikemen and Dismounted Knights, the Silver Swan enveloping this front line. The Barrow Wights have taken a fair amount of damage. There are actually some Lindon archers over here, some Lindon Guard doing their thing. This is a risky move because if you get some friendly fire like that, right into the middle of your own units, I mean, you managed to get two devastating hits on the attackers as well, so I don't know whether that was necessarily worth it, but these are the risks you take. I would say that probably in the grand scheme of things probably wasn't worth it, to be honest with you. I mean, you can see that they routed off a lot of the low-end units, and the attackers are going to have to reorganise this assault now. Belfalas Marines moving. Yeah, these archers are not going to be able to fire directly down. Obviously, it's a shame that Medieval 2 can't do that, but it is very much something that's in the core of the game, that archers cannot shoot directly down from walls or high terrain. They have to arc their shots instead. I believe there was actually a way that someone was once talking about changing that, but in order to do so you would need to go right into the heart of the game, which the Steam version doesn't allow you to do. And obviously the convenience of playing with everyone on Steam is far easier than convincing people to have like cracked copies of the game en masse. for that one thing. Seafarers of Lindon presumably have used their javelins, and they're now being committed into melee. You can see that Harad have got some of their pikes on the front line, but they're already a little bit shaken up. Still, the numbers advantage is going to go for the attackers. Harad's march is moving forward to offer a little bit of support. Excuse me. I don't know about this. Still think over time, as much as the Numenorians have managed to recover somewhat in this situation, I still think they're going to struggle in the long run. Still have some Pharaohs and Nobles left alive, which is kind of impressive when you consider the kind of situations they've been in already. They get caught up actually on some of their own men, and some East Mark Spearmen. They do charge in, managing to carry through into the Muhard Beast Hunters as well. That is the unique feature of the Pharaohs and Swordmasters. Much like a lot of the other traditionally more defensive unit types that Numenor have, like their line between spears, they tend to be a little bit more aggressive than other factions. Pharaohs and Nobles have got a slightly better charge than other sword cavalry. Much like their cohorts are slightly more aggressive than other line infantry. These spears obviously have an AP. All of that good stuff. Back over here, some dwarves on the front line as well, perhaps seeing that Lindon are their only adversary over here. I mean, Lindon themselves have even sent me with some support over on this side, so having some dwarven infantry to back up the Dol Amroth defenders was kind of a no-brainer for the defenders to decide upon. Y2K is still trying to use his javelins to good effect, and the warriors of Khazad-Dum are a little bit more exposed. The Legion Bodyguard are on the front line, so it goes to show Khazad-Dum really wanting to utilise some of that quality to keep this Lindon assault in check. Khazad-Dum Reclaimers getting a little bit closer, so throwing projectiles, facing off against one another, but the Mithlon Marines strike the first blow with their javelins, and the second one actually, which is fairly impressive. But you can see the Khazad-Dum Reclaimers, a weightier projectile, though not armour piercing. But again, against Lindon that doesn't really matter. Many of these Mithlon Marines will actually get back up though and take cover once more. Lindon Guard going to try and take up the mantle of skirmishing with those Khazad-Dum Reclaimers now. And the Legion lines hold firm. Over here, Rohan archers with 107 men left. Still those Lindon Guard firing away, and now the javelins from the Black Guards as well. This front line starting to struggle a little bit more. Angmar with the Guardians of Khazad-Dum and Witch Realm Pikemen now moving on to the front line. Slowly but surely Dol Amroth beginning to struggle, so perhaps more reinforcements are necessary over here to prevent any sort of disaster from occurring. Rohan archers still there. Belfalas Marines taking hits. A lot of units moving off here. What are they going to be doing? I mean, getting closer to the walls is one thing. I mean, they may as well, because I mean, there's only one unit of these Rohan archers which can fire away at them against their whole army. It'd be a little bit different if there was a full firing line over here. A lot of your more important units would be targeted down, but as it is, I think considering you're slowly gaining the upper hand over here, you definitely should be starting to think about moving in and really seizing the initiative in this fight. What about if Rohan and Harad are still making good progress against Numenor, which it looks as though they are, because this front line over here has pretty much been defeated. There's still a unit of out-of-ammunition steel bows over here, but this is more clean-up than anything else at this point. It now really just comes down to whether Rohan and Harad are bold enough to really try and make their gains stick, because if they can send forward the rest of their infantry to consolidate over here, Numenor are going to have a far bigger area to have to try and defend, and that would be bad against numerically superior foes, especially where stuff like Trollmen, Champions of Nafarat, Helm's Hammers, Westmark Marshals, all very, very strong armour-piercing units, so Numenor won't be able to fall back upon their defensive qualities as much. Royal Legion Armenelos doing the business, but this all depends on whether Rohan and Harad are willing to be that aggressive. Medicel Guard are moving forward, so maybe they are. They've still got a lot of units way back over there. If it was me at this point, if I were Rohan or Harad, I would be very much advocating for an all-out offensive at this point. Really try and put the screws to the defenders. They do have a lot of the high-quality armour-piercing units, so more of the Dwarven units have been sat over here as well to try and salvage the situation, but the 3rd Legion will be very vulnerable to the kind of armour-piercing that we have already spoken about with regards to Numenor. This catapult, meanwhile, they've managed to successfully get quite a bit of friendly fire thus far, but also a fair amount of damage to the attackers as well, so this is where this front line will cease to be an attractive proposition for Angmar and Umbar, and you can see indeed the routing that that catapult is inducing. That is the Iron Watch, I believe, as well, that dull thudding and shaking. Belfast Marines doing their thing, but Trolls pushing through the lines and will interrupt the Dol Amroth Javelin Man. Hitting centre mass of a fresher unit of Barrow Whites. The Haven Guard are over here as well, so Dol Amroth really not keen on allowing Umbar and Angmar any further in. They have managed to stabilise things over here actually, so Dol Amroth changing the momentum once again, although that has changed largely on the back of the catapult, and maybe they're already thinking about pulling back and defending a final stand position. Meanwhile, the Dwarves have actually slowly been pushing the Elves back over here, which, considering the presence of the Legion Bodyguard on the front line, is not terribly surprising. Lindon have not committed any of their really high quality units to counteract that, and Legion Bodyguard doing very well so far against stuff like Mithlond Marines. But yes, you can see, I think they are sort of future-proofing here. The Dwarves are not going to be sending forward any more reinforcements, so this is going to be it as far as this front line goes. I mean, they will still hold on for a fair amount of time given the presence of the bodyguard, but there you go. Getting ready to retreat. I actually think this is probably a good time to retreat. They may have been kind of recovering on the Dol Amroth front line, but disaster was always going to strike, I think, against the Numenorians over here, and now the Rohan cavalry also moving forward, so it did behoove them, I think, to start moving backwards quickly, and they are going to continue now to retreat. The Trolls are going to make life pretty awkward. I mean, of all the units they could tangle with, though, the Royal Legion are one that can actually defend themselves fairly effectively against Trolls. The blows continue to rain down. The announcer fancies the chances of the attackers, which generally is how things are going to go in 5v3s anyway, at least until potentially very late on, as we saw with the Elven front last time out. Ironwatch and Viremir and the catapult continuing to fire in. Obviously the Barrow Whites getting cut down to size a little bit. This unit of Doranernal archers is not going to make it back to the defence. If they had any ammunition left, that will be a bit of a shame for the defenders. As the Rohan Riders, the Lindon Infantry and the Trolls from Angmar finish them off. There's still the Arathirum here, so it's a bit chaotic. And with the mortar projectiles that the Iron Watch are also there, and nice hit there onto the Balaketh shield bearers. Smart Course Archers firing in. What are they actually firing at though? Units that are up high maybe? So there are 3 ways up into this final defence position around this keep. This one, which is probably the least attractive to be fair, given the slightly bumpy nature of it. This one, which goes along the walls, I mean Harad are already planning on attacking that, and of course this one over here, which the Dwarves have been using to retreat up until now. Legion Bodyguard struggling a bit at this stage in proceedings. I think that comes more down to the numbers discrepancy, which is opening up on that front line now. really don't know what to make of the catapult in this battle. I mean, some shots have been rather limp. There's been some devastating hits as well, but also friendly fire kind of balances all of that out. I don't know, I think in a 5v3 you have such little margin for error. I think that those friendly fires, you have to judge the catapult rather harshly as a result of that, but I think it was worth the risk in those situations, but it may be that that ultimately proves to be a decisive factor in this battle. Harad and Rohan may be going to completely go down this wall now. The catapult should probably reposition itself now as well, because you can see all the attackers taking up a position directly under the walls, which obviously in real life this would be the absolute worst position you could be in, but in Medieval 2's mechanics it's the safest area for attacking infantry. Wanderers of Numenor, we did see those clear projectiles earlier on in the fight do a little bit of damage. Some of the Legion bodyguard actually managing to escape. Beast Hunters moving in there, 20 of them. They may have seen combat, but it's still a worthwhile unit to save. The warriors of Khazad-Dum will stay behind and sacrifice themselves for the cause. Ultimately, the Beast Hunters are going to be able to get into a position to throw their javelins into the still fleeing Legion bodyguard. All of them, except the banner carrier, actually bloodied. Having seen a lot of combat already. What's the percentages looking like? Dead even. Which is a bad time for the defenders, honestly. You need to be winning at this point in the battle, I would suggest. This is a little bit early to be getting an assault underway here. I mean, this is essentially just feeding kills into the defenders. There's no way that these units are going to be able to achieve really anything of note. Parathill champions, Sons of the Fallen, and that is also the thing. Like, you can pretty much guarantee on, or count on the fact that the defenders are going to have access to some really high quality units in this later stage of the battle. Down, Harad and Lindon finally finding their way into the settlement. There's trollmen down there, which are not the worst target for the Khazad-Dum reclaimers if they decide to go that route. The rest of their units, I mean, still got stuff like barrow wights at their disposal. Now an Iron Royal Guard firing across the way. Shield mains of Rohan moving forward on their lonesome, more missiles finding their way in. I mean, Haradrim archers are not the most damaging, but any damage they can do to the Dwarven front line, especially seeing as they're all unshielded units actually. 2nd Legion Axe Guard just in front of the 1st Legion pikes. Those throwing axes are definitely going to have a good impact. I mean, the 1st Legion pikes are a very scary unit for attackers to have to try and deal with in a situation like this, but the armor piercing actually less handy against both of the attacking forces arrayed against them. Not much they can really do about this though. I mean, Harad and Rohan are free to try and whittle them down as much as possible before moving forwards. And what they make up for in individual damage, they're trying to make up for in volume here with the Haradrim archers. What's going on here? A bit of a counter strike. Legion bodyguard are here. I mean, the Hammers of Gundabad are a lock morale unit, so the dwarves are going to fight to the bitter end over here. And that, I believe, yeah, routing Muhar Beast Hunters, the armor piercing they have on their clubs, not enough to salvage that fight for them. Legion bodyguard moving forwards. Khazad-Dum reclaimers. I've got a really good vantage point here, but it just depends on what they want to go after. I mean, if they see the Noldorin units, I assume they're going to go after them. Harlington infantry taking hits. You can see that they are going to fall away pretty quickly. Fairly devastating shots indeed. Doran Annual archers, they're going after Woods Velostirian, so trying to prevent the attackers from using body-piercing projectiles of their own, which is definitely understandable. They can get into a good position over on that side of things and shoot across into a front line that's over here. Things could get pretty ugly for them. What's going on? some charging sound effects further away. Meanwhile, Medicae Guard being committed forward, which is kind of interesting. Being committed on their own against 1st Legion Pikes and Royal Legion Armolos. As much as the Medicae Guard are a very strong combatant for Rohan, they're going up against some of the very best the game has to offer in class, and this isn't going to go too well for them. Still the arrows coming in an attempt to support, but it's not going to be enough, I fear. I'm wondering what DF Mark actually had in mind there. It's a little bit of a confusing plot. Helm gas firing across the way. And so far, these Hams of Gundabad, in spite of going up against units which maybe aren't typically their chosen opponents with those armor-piercing hammers of theirs, they've managed to deal with a depleted unit of Trollmen, and they're now doing the same against some Lindon units. Just in the background there, Legion Bodyguard having to deal with Mythlon Marines as well. Feels like this has always been a bit of a sideshow, this engagement down here, to the main events elsewhere, but whoever comes out on top over here is going to have extra that they can commit elsewhere. And they've still got the Blade Masts and Harland Infantry, so they still have a presence over here, Lindon, but it's not enough to mount an assault on the higher layer without the rest of their army, you'd say. Horns of Elostirium. They are actually in place. They have any missiles of their own? Yeah. Tirithea Marks going to go to counter skirmish, and probably going to be the end of the Wolves of Elostirium, but maybe ammunition not used on their infantry is exactly what the attackers wanted anyway, as we enter the final 10,000 frames. The main keep of the settlement under threat. These 1st Legion Pikes and Royal Legion, a really good combination. Guards of Khazad-Dum over here as well. And see how quickly, though, they got bloodied by the Demons of the Desert. I mean, this is not the sort of unit you want to be losing to the Demons. I mean, the Demons are one of those units, much like the Witches, we see used, what we see get demolished by attacking or opposition skirmishers often before they can be used properly, but on this occasion, absolutely devastating, one of the scariest units the defenders still have left to them. And that's a real shame for the defenders, because they really needed all of their high quality units at their disposal to be able to carry on in this fight. Westmark Infantry loitering with intent. Victory is almost a certainty. Still not much else happening in other front lines, however. I mean, to be fair, in melee terms, they're still doing okay because of the 1st Legion over here, but if the Demons of the Desert can also get point-blank shots through the remaining Dwarven defenders here as well, things are going to get pretty ugly pretty quick. Still 3 Arathurium alive. Haven Guard coming in to help shore things up. The loss of most of the Guards of Khazad-Dum is a shame, but the Haven Guard will at least butcher their way through Demons of the Desert in melee. Multiple HP they may be, but Haven Guard on a completely different level when it comes to their melee focus. Do they still have ammunition? Because this is still a very dangerous situation for the defenders if the Demons do still have ammunition. Berserkers on the way. Warns of Elostirium in position. Again, the Reclaimers represent a real threat, so it's a good spot that from Y2K, but I mean, at some point soon, surely the main assault is also going to begin down here. I mean, is this all the attackers have left over? Still, it's dead even. So, I mean, the attackers haven't yet started to really pull ahead as they can often do, but maybe this is because the defenders chose the right time to retreat. They have enough of an army left to be able to really dig in. Very often you see the defenders leave it too long to pull back, and then the attackers can simply overwhelm them in the later parts of the game. That's a good and bad. Obviously the locked morale nature of them is going to help them, but we haven't really seen any routing from the defenders as such. Maybe some very depleted units from Dong Amroth, like the Doranano archers that got surrounded, but as far as actual fighting goes, any routing we've seen has been a result of the catapult inflicting it upon Angmar and the like. A little bit of routing from Harad and spearmen that were pushing too far through the lines earlier on in the fight as well. Things have been about getting right behind enemy lines, which is all well and good. I mean, the Westmark infantry can certainly handle themselves, but they're not going to enjoy being in melee against the Warsaw. Just really getting into the other unit. Now some Naran Royal Guard from Numenor as well, helping to shorten things up. So far, Harad and Rohan being very much contained, despite the loss of the guards of Khazad-Dum. The defenders doing quite well. I mean, the other attackers do need to start making something happen, and finally we see the renewal of an assault over here. I mean, I can understand their trepidation with the Wanderers of Nimrodal right there. You know what's coming next, but surely they have something that can counter-skirmish the Wanderers left. I mean, if they don't, then they may be in a little bit of trouble here, because Lindon alone can't deal with the dwarves over in the other quieter section of the defence. Still a couple of Arathiran left alive. Alcaron-less Legion accompanying the Barrow-Wites. There isn't that much left, is there? Warlords Valostirian still alive. Every little helps, and I think the attackers are going to need it, because the defenders are still dug in, and it's not just going to be a case of allowing your numbers to do the work anymore. I think they are going to have to be a little bit more savvy about this, the attackers, if they do hope to be victorious in this fight. Iron Watch of Miramir, I mean, this is another unit which can be potentially devastating. We haven't seen the Witches yet, I don't believe, unless they've been shot and killed already, which is always a possibility. I mean, there's going to be friendly fire over here as well, but I think the idea here is to try and rout some of the lowlier units that Harad have over here, and then continue from there. But Trollmen are now wrapping around the front line, so I think this front line might be lost, actually. And Irish Sentinels are going to have to get into place rather quickly. Shadow bows, I mean, that's another dangerous unit of skirmishes the defenders still have left. So they've got 2 units of rangers they can fall back on. I don't know how much ammunition the Iron Watch have left to them. And Gas moving forward again. Lindon infantry. And trying to make something happen with the units they have over here. They've got another unit of pikes, so they've got 2 units of Harlington infantry. The most dangerous aspect of this is, of course, the Noldoran Blade Masters, which will demand a big response, and the Pharazim Sword Masters are certainly that. But I don't know. This could be the moment in the fight where we really learn what way the pendulum is going to swing. Counterfire from the Serpent's Fangs, but the Ardenheim Shadowbows, this is why I like them. They're my favourite ranger in the game because of their higher armour. Looks like they just ran out of ammunition though. Some of them pulling out their swords, some of them still utilising their bows, which is a little bit strange, but Lindon, they're really doing the business against the dwarves. That's actually where that locked morale will come in handy, because a lesser unit would probably crumble in the face of that. Blackwatch Legion now moving forward. This is, I mean, yeah, this is going to be the decisive moment now then. If the Great Shield Infantry is pushing forward and trying to cripple the defensive lines to allow the attackers to wash over them, if this succeeds, the defenders are going to have not much else they can really do. Haven Guard. Balance of forces evenly matched so far, but slowly the pressure's going to be ratcheted up, and Hammer Guard and the like are going to be coming in. That's more armor piercing. Balakith Axe Guard. I mean, this is going to be more or less everything there. I think the attackers should go on to win this with this application of force, but depends. Maybe if the Iron Watch still have ammunition, if the Rangers, the defenders, still have ammunition, maybe things. Although I think that answers our question. The Iron Watch are very much in melee, so I'm going to assume that their ammunition supply has run dry, which is a problem because the Helm's Hammers are back there. On the way, another very high quality unit that's going to be committed soon. Another high quality unit that's also going to be very good against the defenders that are arrayed against them. Northern Blade Masters doing their thing. Lindon actually with some forward momentum, but Mithril Guard coming over here now. I think Lindon have actually done quite well in this fight, but it's just been one of those situations where I personally wouldn't have had Lindon be the one trying to handle a defensive position on their own. I would have had Lindon and Angmar maybe team up on that position over there and have Umbar come over here. I think that probably would have worked out better. And then you can obviously mix and match a little bit as well. We saw Lindon supporting that other assault anyway. So it's not like you're stuck in those roles, but I think on a macro scale that probably would have been the answer. Rajan Archers trying to shoot over here. I mean, going after the Mithril Guard, obviously most of these arrows will bounce right off, but a little bit of extra damage certainly isn't going to hurt. Meanwhile, the Blackwatch Legion have pushed their way through the enemy lines. They are actually going to be overrun by all of the skirmishes they find themselves in the middle of, but has the chaos they've caused been terminal over here? I think it probably has, because Umbar and Angmar simply have too much left, I think, for the defenders to be able to withstand them for too much longer. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle now. Rohan and Harad, who have... It's been kind of a strange battle, actually, that Rohan and Harad have had to fight. I think they've done pretty well. They seized the momentum early against Numenor, and it feels like Numenor's always been slightly on the back foot ever since then. And considering the deficiencies they have in terms of armour, both factions, again, Numenor maybe with not the density of missiles that you need to really take advantage of the weaknesses Rohan and Harad both exhibit. Riddermark Cavalry are in here now, charging into the Mithril Guard. I don't think they killed a single one, but at close range like that, that's not terribly surprising. Lindon forces now turning around. I think this pocket of Lindon resistance is going to be destroyed, but elsewhere the attackers are going to be just fine anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. There's a lot of armour piercing on this front line as well, which was always going to be a little bit tough. Armour piercing useful against all of the defensive factions today. There go the Witches as well. I don't think it matters too much, because I think actually last battle we saw the Witches used Angmar had already lost. On this occasion I think Angmar had already won, so the Witch is actually not terribly decisive. They're simply going to act as a bit of a finisher really for Dol Amroth, as we see those Doranano archers and Wanderers of Nimrodal run. The Blackwatch Legion did have the desired effect then. Again, it was fairly late on. When the time came to strike, the attackers did that pretty well here in the last stand. Mithril Guard, so yeah, 9% the difference, which seems about right. It was very even, and then the attackers really did start to run away with it a little bit, but that's often the way in 5v3s when the attackers come good in the late game. They can open up a pretty big gap pretty quickly, but 9% is not all that much. I mean, I was actually surprised when I looked at the assault over here, and I didn't realise that Umbar and Angmar actually had that little left. So they had to commit it all at once, and they did. And that was what has given them the W. That Numenor defense completely crushed. I think at this point we can safely go up to ×2 speed. Victory is a distinct possibility for the trolls of Trollmen of Harad, I should say. Khazad-Dum Swordmasters, are they going to be the last ones left standing? Probably, if pikes are the thing, which is... what's over here? 9 Haven Guard, so it's either going to be the Haven Guard or the Khazad-Dum Swordmasters. I'd assume it'd be the Khazad-Dum Swordmasters given the level of opposition the Haven Guard going up against. The level of armour piercing as well. Perhaps not though. It is going to be the Haven Guard. And due to outlast the mighty Khazad-Dum. And there we have it. Not a lore-friendly battle, but a very interesting one nonetheless. In a macro sense, I don't think the defenders actually did anything too wrong. I think it was just slightly more granular, the problems that they were having. Obviously, part of it as well is the natural RNG that is Medieval 2's artillery. Numenor could have been a little bit more front-loading on their defence over there to stop Harad and Rohan from gaining the initiative. Little things, I think, is the only difference you can ask for. 11% actually the difference in the end, so just over the 10% mark there, but still well fought by the attacks. I think they did deserve to win. Like, the defenders did well, but like I said, when it came down to the smaller details, I think the attackers were a little bit more well put together in terms of what they were doing. Obviously varying levels of kills across the various factions, so Umbar not with very many, but then they were probably the healthiest faction come the end of the game as well, with lots of Alcarondas Legion and Balakathak's Guard remaining. Angmar the ones taking a little bit more punishment on the way forward with stuff like their Barrow-wights at the hands of the Catapult. Like I said, I really liked the way that Harad and Rohan actually gained the initiative over Numenor in this fight. And Lindon, it was, I mean, they got the most kills in the end, which is impressive, but it was a weird kind of situation that Y2K had to deal with, but I thought we dealt with it quite well. As for the defenders, like I said, none of them played particularly badly. I just think it's all about small details, little decisions made which do build up, and in a 5v3, if you get those wrong, it can really end up making the battle an unwinnable situation, but still a close enough battle anyway. Let's see what did the damage for the Angmar then. So the Black Guard actually doing quite well. The Hammer Guard were only committed very late on, and only got 7 kills. So that's quite interesting actually. Maybe they got targeted down by projectiles. The Witchers got 102, but again, that's right at the end, so it's not really worth mentioning. The Trolls, however, were an important part of the battle, and I do appreciate the fact that a lot of people now are using Trolls in bursts where they commit them and then they take them out of the fight when they see that things are going to get pretty bad for them, because if you leave Trolls in there, then they will die off pretty quickly. But good use of the Trolls there. 140 kills for an attacking army is good for a unit. The Pikemen as well used a pretty good effect. Barrow-wights don't really get an awful lot of kills, so that's not too surprising to see them there, but yeah, 0 kills on some Guardians of Khazad-Dum there. The big 0. Not good for any kind of unit. Even Snaga should be getting at least 1 kill, surely. But that's the way of things, I suppose. So yeah, big thank you to DF John for sending this battle to me. This will be actually the last one that I'm recording before I'm sent away on another trip away for work. I will be mentioning this, and I will have already mentioned this, I think, in a community post on YouTube, that I think as a result of this there is actually going to be a week missing in the schedule. I think from it's the 24th of August, the Wednesday, basically the last week of August, I think is going to be a gap in my schedule, the first gap in my schedule for a long time, that which is unfortunate, but I've done the best I can, and I've managed to do enough, I think, to that'll be the only gap as well in my schedule, because I've got 2 weeks off when I get back, and I'll be able to batch record again and easily get myself ahead of schedule once again, and also I'll be able to maybe, well, it kind of depends. If I get back and I feel like it, I might stream on the Wednesday, but based on how knackered I'm going to be, I assume that that's not going to happen, but maybe we can fill the schedule with something. I don't know, but chances are there'll be a week in August which won't have any videos posted, which is a shame, but it is what it is. And maybe a week off is good. Maybe it'll give the channel a little bit of time to breathe, considering the consistent uploads have been happening for a long time now. Maybe, I don't know, I mean, YouTube tends to punish inactivity, but it is what it is. There's nothing more I can do. I've done what I can, and the fact that I've had a limited amount of time to record and I'm only going to be missing 2 video slots is not terrible. But yeah, it is what it is. I've managed to, enough rambling on that count, I guess. As for what is going to be coming up when I do get back, obviously I do still intend to do the knockout tourney for the two-handed infantry in Reforged. There's still a few Silmarillion battles I want to get through, and also plenty of replays that I've been sent in Reforged by Winged Swordsman and others. And also I do have a backlog actually of repeat maps that I'm going to do. I think it's been a while since we've seen the Khazad-Dum outpost. I got sent a battle on there, which maybe we can do at some point when we get into the autumn. But yeah, plenty of replays. Certainly the channel won't be struggling for that until we get into December, which is where things of course will change up fairly substantially, but I've mentioned that enough at this point. So yeah, big thank you to DF John once again, big thanks to all the players. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.